So, No Trace by David Madden was actually hard for me to read. Um, I found it just like kind of a hard read just because the subject matter was just so dark, I think. Um, I really think that it's just really heartbreaking because you have Gordon going to his son's room after he commits suicide and um, doing it by blowing himself up, where others were also impacted by it, was really hard. Um, it's hard to even imagine how Gordon feels, I think, in that moment. And I think it's even more heartbreaking the way the story is told. We get to see Gordon going into Ernest, his son's room, his dorm room, and seeing, just trying to figure out why he would have done something like that, just looking for answers. I think it's really hard, and I think it's not like a simple, like, question. I don't think it's really answered in the story. All the questions that Gordon has, why he would do that. And it's also heartbreaking too, because you kind of get to find out that Ernest wasn't really close with his son. They didn't really relate. Kind of in the story, it kind of says how they didn't really relate on a lot of things. It was hard for them to do things together, and it's also heartbreaking to see Ernest going through his son's room and this quote, he says, glancing around the room, he hoped to discover a picture of himself. Seeing none, he sat down again. And it's really hard because Ernest is trying to find himself in his son's life, and he doesn't even see it. It's like he was never in his son's life, and that's really hard too. And I think it's just really hard in this story. And it's interesting because it takes place in 1970. That's when it was written, taking place during kind of the Vietnam War. And it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about the question, how does the setting of the story, like where it takes place, impact it? And I think it really does. I think it really does impact it, because nowadays, like in the slides had mentioned, I think that nowadays we're kind of hardened to that because there's so much violence like that nowadays, with so many violent acts like domestic terrorism that we've experienced, I think. And the timing of this, I think it's almost more relevant today even than it was when it was written, because just because I think people could stand to read this story and see it through the people's eyes who are going through it, and it's just kind of an interesting take. I think it is a good story that people should read, even though it's really hard, I think, personally, to get through, just because it's a really hard subject matter and it is heartbreaking, but I think it's really important too, because I think it is relevant to today with all the violence that in America that we're experiencing. So yeah, but overall, I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed reading this story, but I think it's an important short story for people to read.